Welcome to NC Debrief, the show where we analyze and break down political, social, and cultural issues that affect us as Africans. I'm Tolulokwe Adele Balogun, and today we're looking at the Roger Lumbala case and the possibility of justice for war crimes in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Let me first introduce my guest. Now joining me, I have Kambale Musavuli. He is a Congolese human rights activist. I also have Ayodele Owolabi, a teaching assistant in the International Relations Department at Jiaotong Liverpool University in China. He is currently researching human security and trade agreements in Africa at the University of Liverpool. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, let's get straight to it. According to an investigation from the United Nations in 2003, Roger Lumbala led an armed group called the Congolese Rally for Democracy National, RCDN, created in 2000 and backed by the Ugandan military during the country's deadly civil war. The United Nations investigation confirmed a pattern of looting, killing, and rape as tactics of war in 2002 for RCDN forces in the Beni area. The reports also said that summary executions targeted the Nande ethnic group and Pygmies who were forced to flee to the forest for the first time to escape persecution. The victims reported several cases of mutilation followed by acts of cannibalism. Investigators also said that those taking part in the operations tortured, mutilated, and killed other combatants before using their organs as war trophies. The former rebel leader Lumbala was arrested in Paris at the end of December 2020 and placed in provisional detention on January the 2nd after being charged. 2 days later, France's National Anti-Terrorism Prosecutor's Office issued a public statement that reveals the serious charges brought against him: complicity in crimes against humanity and participation in a group formed for the purpose of preparing war crimes. So let's get to the conversation. Let me start with this, and I'll come to you first, Kambale. After the conflict, Lumbala became a minister in the country's transitional government between 2004 and 2005. He was also a former opposition lawmaker. Now, Democratic Republic of Congo authorities accused him of high treason and complicity with M23 rebels who were defeated in November 2013 after a government offensive by the government and UN forces. He returned to the DRC in January 2017 after the signing of the Sylvester agreement, which ended the legal prosecution of certain opposition figures, including himself, by the Congolese state. Before his arrest, what does his continued freedom up to the point of arrest say about how serious this situation has been handled, or even how it has been handled at all?
When we look at Roger Lumbala's case in a silo, it seems as a strange situation where we have someone who have committed crimes and who has government position and keeps traveling around the world. This is really what has unfolded in DRC since 1996. There is a culture of impunity, and Lumbala is one of the smallest fish in this crisis. If you look at the crisis in the Congo from 1996 to today, over 6 million Congolese have died due to two important things. One is the invasions of the Congo by its neighbors, Rwanda and Uganda, who continue to support rebel groups. So when we look at Roger Lumbala, we are speaking about him where we are not finding out where did his weapon come from. RCD rebel group was armed by Uganda, as you pointed out. Is the Ugandan president involved in the case? No. Is the Ugandan military involved in the case? No. The second aspect of the DRC conflict is the access to Congo's resources. There is this need of having resources that make our modern-day technology function while Congolese people are dying. So to address the culture of impunity, Roger Lumbala being arrested now, there is a call for his arrest in France, is a step in the right direction. Okay. But we need to look at that crime. It comes specifically as one of the crimes from the UN mapping exercise report published in 2010. This report says that what's happening in the Congo are war crimes, crimes against humanity, and possible genocide if proven in a competent court. We have one person. That report has 617 incidents. And the process of having the case in France is one step. But the most important thing for the Congolese, we are calling for an international tribunal for the Congo, where the tribunal will be in DRC and try the criminals of yesterday so that they have their day in court, and also remove those who are still in government position till today and not held accountable.
Let me bring Ayodele into this. Let's quickly look at the St. Sylvester Agreement. What do you think of such agreements that allow individuals who are accused and obviously sometimes involved in war crimes to escape prosecution, and in effect, it denies victims justice?
Thank you, thank you for having me on the show today. Well, it's a good question you asked. And when we talk about war crimes and the effect it has on humankind as a whole, it's a crime that, or there are sets of crimes that anyone who perpetrates should not be allowed to go scot-free. You will see that various governments have what we call the immunity clauses in their various legal instruments. And to be fair, the brain behind an immunity clause is not about exonerating the perpetrator from justice, but it is just because at a particular point in time, the perpetrator is serving the state, serving the government, and that immunity clause is allowed for the time being, just so that they are able to carry out the affairs of the state without any hiccup whatsoever. But then, the moment the perpetrator leaves the office, he becomes open. He becomes susceptible to any court of law across the world. Because we have from the Geneva Convention and the Hague Convention that war crimes are jurisprudence, what we call in law universal crimes. And every country in the world has universal jurisdiction to try whoever is accused or indicted of these crimes. So technically, it's not about the perpetrators allowed to roam free.
Okay.
It's just a question of time. And I think for Lumbala, time has actually caught up with him eventually.
Okay, so I want to ask you, Ayodele, something that Kambale brought up, and that's the role of the DRC's neighbors. Now, let's look at the roles of the presidents of Rwanda and Uganda. Both countries were actually implicated in war crimes in the DRC. Uganda was even asked to pay a fine that it hasn't done. We also know that sometime later, the president of Rwanda has actually even said that we should move on and we should sort of let the past be the past, that history should be laid to rest. In an interview, the Rwandan president Paul Kagame made some statements suggesting that Congo, then the Zaire, was actually first involved in the genocide in Rwanda, but this is hardly known or talked about. So when you hear his statement, and then you obviously see the evidence that points to the involvement of financing of militias by Uganda and Rwanda, what do we think in terms of accountability? Kambale also said that the UN report, the mapping, talks about over 600 incidents. Right now, we're only seeing about 2 or 3 individuals that are being targeted or at least prosecuted. What happens to the countries that also finance the militias? What do you think should or even can be done?
Okay, I think that's a good question, but the issue we should consider is in what capacity did Uganda and Rwanda get involved in these war crimes? We should not forget history can give credence to this. We should not forget that at the time when DRC was going through its problems, its crises, conflicts, and all, Rwanda was also going through almost the same crisis. And these are neighboring countries, Rwanda, Uganda, and DRC. They are neighboring countries. And Paul Kagame, for a person being the president of Rwanda, has over the years called for African solutions to African problems. So from where I see it, the president of Rwanda is trying to make this a problem for Africa to solve and not a problem for the international community or more or less France to get involved. Talking about being implicated in these war crimes, it is common practice across the globe. When your neighbor is at war, they often seek for, I would say, assistance, military assistance from neighbors and all that. It's happened in the Horn of Africa several times, with Ethiopia, Djibouti, and all that. But then, when Kagame asked for us to forget about the events of the past, my personal analysis of the statement is not asking us to forget about the crimes, but he's asking us to forget about the intricacies. Because when we look at these crimes, or when we look at the issue in the Congo generally, if we look at the issues in the Congo, there are a lot of political underpinnings that implicate a whole lot of Western states. So going back to these cases would be digging up cans of worms that have long infested the country way back in the 1960s. As for Uganda, Uganda is completely denying their involvement in the war crimes. And like every other legal construct, what the United Nations or France has to do is go to the court and prove with evidence that Uganda has been involved. For Rwanda did not deny, neither did they agree to. But the president of Rwanda is saying that the mapping report of the UN is completely flawed. Which I completely agree, because I did go through the report and I realized that there were so much inconsistencies, legal inconsistencies, political inconsistencies, and all that.
Okay.
So, I just think at this point, Uganda and Rwanda should be put aside and let's face Lumbala himself and see where we go from there.
I'm interested to see if Kambale agrees with you. So taking a look at the statement of Rwanda's president and also what Ayodele said in terms of looking at the context to the involvement of these countries. Kambale, do you think it's in the best interest to maybe leave aside why Uganda and Rwanda got involved, allegedly did finance militias, not necessarily even the government, but actual militias who were killing and torturing people, and face those in the DRC who are guilty of the crimes? What are your thoughts on this?
Now, I think we have to move from opinions to actually facts. The Congo sued Rwanda and Uganda to the International Court of Justice. And the case for Rwanda was rejected only because Rwanda has never signed the Rome Treaty. So the court said that they didn't have jurisdiction. But for the case of Uganda, they were found guilty of war crimes, and they were asked to pay $10 billion of reparation that Congolese have not yet collected. In the case of Rwanda, it's beyond even militia groups. I mean, can you imagine that today, the Rwandan general named James Kabarebe, in 1998, was actually the Congolese Army Chief of Staff. So let me put that in context. Can you imagine a Sierra Leonean soldier coming to Nigeria and becoming the head of the Nigerian military, yet will say that Sierra Leone is not involved in Nigeria? That's the context of the DRC. So it's not just supporting militia groups. Their troops were there. They used the rationale that cannot hold truth, where the rationale said that they are going after people who committed genocide in Rwanda in 1994. Congo is a country the size of Western Europe. How do you justify a small country like Rwanda enters the Congo in the east and move from the east of the Congo all the way to the west in the capital city, where there are no person in the capital city that committed a genocide? So I'm clear about why Rwanda came to the DRC. They are US allies on the war on terror. They have the soldiers in Iraq, in Afghanistan, now in Central African Republic, in Haiti. So Rwanda and Uganda have been US allies on the war on terror. And no matter what they do on the African continent, they're not held accountable. Okay. It's more of a call for Africans to look at the situation. We're not discussing 1,000 people dead. We are discussing over 6 million Congolese who died, where half of the people who died are children under the age of 5, and hundreds of thousands of women brutally raped as a weapon of war. And there is a justification. But in court, we know we've won it. So for Congolese, it's not a question of who's right and who's wrong. We're saying we have the crimes, not all of them. We have 617 of them that has been certified as war crimes, crimes against humanity, and possible genocide. For anyone who may have a doubt, why don't we go to court? Why don't we create a tribunal for the DRC? We had one for Sierra Leone, Liberia. We had one for Rwanda. We had one for Yugoslavia. Why can't we have one for DRC? So that there is no mystery to the crimes that have taken place in the DRC.
I want us to stay on the role of foreign countries. You've mentioned it as well as Ayodele. Now, many might ask, why is France involved? Well, the French judiciary has jurisdiction to prosecute crimes against humanity, and those cases committed abroad on foreign victims if the perpetrators are present on French territory or are residents in France. So, Kambale, I'm going to stick with you. What do you think of France's involvement and the prosecution of Lumbala? We've talked now, you've mentioned, of course, America's interest and how it's playing out in the case against Uganda and Rwanda. But let's look at France. It's not like France's hands are completely clean on the continent either. So what do you think of France's involvement and its prosecution of Lumbala?
I mean, the prosecution happens because there was actually a
global village.
I think there was a complaint that was submitted, I believe, in 2016 around this case. Because one, he was a rebel leader traveling. A group of lawyers and Congolese did submit this complaint because this is not the first time a case has happened in Europe and in France particularly.
Yeah.
Look at the case of Rose Kabuye, who was a Rwandan soldier who was arrested in France due to the international arrest warrant by a French judge, Bruguière. We've had the case of Pinochet in Spain, so where he was tried also in Spain because of the international, the universal jurisdiction. So these things have taken place around the world. I'm seeing that as a step in the right direction, but I think they will have challenges. A case in France will require for investigators to go to DRC to get the evidence. So there may be some constraints. But as Congolese, we're looking at this case, we are much more worried about the lack of names of people who committed the crimes. I don't know if you noticed, I keep talking about the UN mapping exercise report.
Yes.
This report has actually a confidential annex of people who committed the crimes. The UN has refused to disclose this listing. Right? So it was published in 2010. They published a report without the names of the people who committed the crime and say that whenever a court will exist, that's when they will disclose. Now, you can guess who are the people who committed the crime. That's why we know, for Roger Lumbala, we know which crime within the report they refer to. So in the end, it's not a case in France that will help the Congolese. The Congolese are saying that we need to have the case in DRC. Why is that critical? We have victims, survivors of the war, who want to feel that there has been justice. And on the African context, we actually have an example where we've done that. Habré of Chad was tried in Senegal, and the people of Chad, seeing that process on the ground, felt that there was justice. In the case of the DRC, we want to see the same.
This is the point where we'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll look at why now, what possible African solutions there could be in this situation, and of course more. We're talking about the Lumbala trial and the possibility of justice for war crimes victims. Stay with us.
JJ has always been my father's hero. So this year, I wanted to do something really special. If I could just talk to JJ, I'm sure he would remember Dad. Mom says never give up. Hello JJ, it's me Victor. My dad's birthday is coming up soon and I want to surprise him. And she was right. I have been looking for you everywhere. Please help me.
Hi Samuel, happy birthday, it's JJ. Happy birthday to my man.
My dad is my hero, but now JJ is too.
Glow, the best data plans in town. Find your first. Dial *777#. Glow.
You're watching NC Debrief on NewsCentral. We're talking about the Roger Lumbala case and the possibility of justice for war crimes in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So let's look at why now. And I think Kambale has sort of answered that question. Anyway, he was in Paris in 2014 when he was applying for asylum in France. He also said that he had actually lived in France for some 20 years. And given the fact that, as I said earlier, Kambale has answered the question in terms of those Congolese lawyers and victims who actually applied for this. So we can move forward from that. Let's talk now about someone whose role does not seem to be very often spoken about, and that's America's role. Kambale, I think this is an opportune time for us to really look at what it has been costing the DRC in terms of the numerous both regional and outside of the continent interference that has been coming because of its resources. What is America's role in all of this? You've highlighted or hinted at it regarding Rwanda and Uganda, but beyond that, what is America's role in the situation happening in the DRC?
And as of now, the U.S. has always been involved in the DRC, and I think I will try to be as brief as I can to speak about the 100-year history of the U.S. in the Congo. In 1885, Western nations sat down to carve up the African continent. What people do not know is that the United States was there. The first country to recognize Congo as the personal property of King Leopold was the United States. Under King Leopold, over 10 to 15 million people died in the DRC. Why? Because we needed access to the rubber of the Congo. The rubber was used for the tires of the cars and the vehicles. The same thing happened when you look at the 1945 to 1960. Congo was essential for World War II. The United States needed the uranium for the DRC to bomb Japan. The uranium used to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki came from the Congo. Wow. The US at the time supported the Belgian rule and the colonization. But Congolese rose up. We elected democratically Patrice Lumumba as our prime minister. Within weeks, he was deposed and assassinated with the help of the CIA and Belgium. Beyond that, we had a dictator, Mobutu, for 32 years, backed by the United States, while the Congolese people strive to change. As Congolese strive to change their country, they did not get the support. What got the support was a military invasion to remove Mobutu. And the military invasion, which started in 1996, was of Rwanda and Uganda, who invaded the Congo in 96, removed the dictator, and have unleashed, as up to now, the death of millions. Why was it necessary? In 1996, a key mineral was found in the DRC, a mineral called coltan, a mineral found in your cell phone, your laptop, your DVD player, your VCR, your technology devices had the minerals from the DRC. So for the need of the resources to get it at a cheaper price, the concept of having chaos made it possible for Congo's resources to leave the country illegally at a cheaper price while we pay the price. And Congo hasn't been the same since 96 to present. As we're talking about the RCD of Roger Lumbala, and then we mentioned the M23. Right now, we may talk about ADF. Yeah. So we'll continue to talk about different rebel groups with different names, but it's the same system. You support proxy militias, they enter into communities, displace communities, get access to resources, kill millions, and there is no accountability. And the call, because we know the role of the United States and in them wanting the resources of Africa, it's important for Africans everywhere to be aware. When you hear the Congo, just as Wangai Matai said, it's always about the resources. And let's fight to make sure that Congolese can control their own affairs and control their land, their resources.
So, Ayodele, you've listened to a lot of the things that Kambale has said. We've talked now about America's role and the fight for resource control with all of those involved from outside of the DRC. But let's also continue to look at the investigation into Lumbala, which comes less than 2 months after another DRC ex-militia leader was actually arrested and prosecuted. Now, do you think we're going to see more of this? Is there awareness building in the West as to what costs our tablets and our phones are costing those in the DRC? Can we begin to believe that there will be justice for what we have seen in the Democratic Republic of Congo?
Well, justice is a relative term. I should start with that. Justice for A might not mean justice for B. But like Kambale rightly said, which I do agree with him, the kind of justice citizens of DRC got to see is a justice that is instituted in a court that is based in the DRC. Because we cannot rule out the fact that there has always been foreign interests in the DRC, just like Kambale just rightly said now. So then that doesn't mean that we're not going to get evidence from surface, the testimonies and all that. I mean, evidence and testimony shown enough to actually convict Lumbala. So to be fair, justice could be served. It's just in the idea of whose interest is the justice served. Would it be served in the interest of the citizens of DRC, or to be served in the interest of the international community whose eyes cannot leave the DRC? Let me quickly add a little to what Tambali said about the role of the international community in DRC, which personally I think has fueled the crisis over the years. I mean, we have coltan, we have cobalt, which is greatly mined in the DRC. Record has it that 70% of cobalt comes from DRC, 80% of coltan comes from DRC. And cobalt, for example, is that raw material, that mineral resource that is very instrumental in the development of electric batteries for electric vehicles. So if you look at Europe and many Western states, there is a projection that by 2045, all vehicles will run on batteries.
Yeah.
And we have most of these batteries being developed using these raw materials from the Congo. So the question is, what interest exactly does France have? What interest exactly does the international community have in DRC? Is it just about dishing out justice in the name of justice, or dishing out justice for the benefits that they would get? Again, either ways, provided evidence presented before a good court, I mean, courts with jurisdiction, excuse me,
okay.
Then I mean, of course, justice will be served.
Okay. I like the point you just brought up, because it brings about, again, the fact that there's so many intricacies that are involved in this particular case. And earlier you mentioned African solutions to the situation in the DRC. And it's quite unfortunate that we know that with everything that the DRC possesses in resources, it should be such a wealthy country that has all it needs to cater for its people. But we obviously see that is not the case. What do you think African solutions to the DRC problem look like? Where's the AU in all of this? We can talk about the United Nations. We can talk about international interference. But what about the African Union? What about other African countries in terms of showing solidarity or condemning even some of the actions that are happening in the DRC? Ayodele, back to you.
Okay. There's a lot the African Union can do. But the question is, how strong is the African Union as a supranational body? Then we also look at the role of other African countries. The big question and the big issue in Africa as a whole is the question of the rule of law. So when you have a particular country, which we have a whole lot of them in Africa, has no respect for the rule of law, then that brings us to the point where we question whether a country that does not have something can be able to offer to another country that does not have the same thing. So the African Union is, in its current state, a bit skewed, because even policies and agreements to which countries have signed, they do not honor these agreements. So in a way, the African Union does not have a strong hold on what's happening in the Congo.
Wow.
Because they do not have the supranational power to enforce certain policies and agreements in the DRC. But what I see is we have a bright future for the African Union. I mean, with the Vision 2063 that is just kicking off with different forms of instruments, I believe that the African Union is working strongly towards a point where we will be able to not only find solutions to the problem in the DRC, but solutions to the problems across the continent.
Yes. Okay, so Kambale, as we're wrapping up, I want to ask you the same question. We've seen basically a lack of involvement from the African Union and a lack of involvement from other countries across the continent, leaving out the context and the situation with Rwanda and Uganda. But what do you expect What are you expecting from the African Union? What are you expecting in terms of solidarity from other African countries in the context of how things are happening in the DRC? As you said, over 6 million people have lost their lives, the majority being children under 5 years old. That should alarm any continent. It should be an issue that we're hearing about from all different areas, but that's not the case. So what do you say in terms of finding African solutions to this particular problem?
For me, it's very simple, right? It's really important for Africans to actually first know what's happening. Many Africans do not know this is actually unfolding in DRC.
Yeah.
And also to be conscious that the situation in the Congo is happening for a reason. It's to stifle the destiny of the African continent. As long as Congo is unstable, in Nigeria, you may not have electricity. Why am I saying that? The Congo River has the potential to provide the electricity to the entire African continent. And this is what Nkrumah was fighting about, and many of the forefathers of independence of Africa, that the liberation of the Congo is going to be critical for the development of Africa. The last one, more so for Nigeria. Remember what happened in Lekki. And when I saw the situation in Lekki, I shared with a few of my friends, I told them, what happens in Lekki happens in DRC every day. What did I mean by that? It's the sentiment that there is injustice and yet nothing takes place. But people rally around injustices. We've done that as African people. When we found out that there was an apartheid regime in South Africa, we as Africans came together. No matter what the South African government did, we came together to make sure that South Africans were treated with dignity. It's the same situation in the DRC, no matter our understanding of it. We should say that there should not be any genocide on the African continent and engage. How? By putting pressure on our government. What is Buhari's position on the situation in DRC and many other Africans? I mean, when you're speaking about the African Union, the biggest abomination for 2021 is the president of the DRC is the chairman of the African Union for 2021. Yet, he just recognized Western Sahara as a territory that belongs to Morocco, which is against even the African Union's position. So we see ourselves where we have a club of dictators, a club of leaders who don't represent us at the African Union. And the solution to that is going back to Kwame Nkrumah. We need a people's-led movement, a people-to-people connection across the African continent, so that what's happening in Lekki happens. Me in Kinshasa, I will mobilize people to stand with the people of Lekki, people of Nigeria. The same as in Nigeria, when you hear that millions of people are dying in the DRC, you will stand up for it. You will ask for accountability and continue to share the information, because that's the biggest challenge we have in the DRC. People actually do not know what's happening. And when we know, all the processes that we're asking for, the International Tribunal for Congo, holding people accountable will happen, because it will make the criminals of yesterday hard to travel to Paris, because everyone will know Roger Lumbala on my flight is a warlord. James Kabarebe, the Rwandan former defense minister who was a Congolese army chief of staff, is a criminal. And it will make it harder for the criminals of yesterday to continue to do their bidding. That's my submission to the solution. In short, Pan-Africanism is the way.
All right, I think this is a fantastic note to end the conversation with. There is no way we can exhaust discussion surrounding the Democratic Republic of Congo, Lumbala, militias, and even seeking justice for the victims of war crimes, not just there, but across the continent. Thank you so much, Kambale Musavuli, a Congolese human rights activist, and Ayodele Owolabi, a teaching assistant in international relations. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on NC Debrief today.
Thank you.
All right. We hope that these kinds of conversations will spur reflection and action. While the show may be over, the conversation doesn't end here. If you're interested in how the conversation about Congo is happening, please go on social media and search the hashtag #CongoIsBleeding. You can also use our social media platforms at NewsCentral TV and the hashtag NCDebrief to let us know your thoughts on our conversation. Until next time, I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun.
In this earth, we grow champions. In this earth, greatness takes root. Here, talent flourishes and passion ignites. Here, dreams, they come alive. We know football and life, they are the same. You get the ball, you run with the ball. People try to take the ball from you, don't let them. Keep your eyes on the ball. Don't lose sight of the goal. And when it's time, take the shot. Life is football. You must take your shot.
Great supporters of football. Glow.